Another day, another banger. Today, we're diving into the pursuit of happiness. Will Smith portrays Chris Gardner, a man facing real struggles but never giving up on his dreams. Join us as we explore his inspiring journey of hope and determination. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the recap. The movie starts off with Will Smith, known as Chris Gardner in the movie, waking up his young son Christopher early in the morning. As the title screen rolls in, we get various scenes showing the daily life of the people in San Francisco. We see corporate workers, blue-collar workers, kids and their parents going to school. And finally, we see Chris and son walking to daycare, with Chris carrying some kind of machine with him. As they walk, the two start discussing young Christopher's birthday, with Christopher saying that he wishes to make a list of the things he wants for his birthday. Considering their less than ideal finances, Chris tells him that he won't be able to get him a lot of things, but Christopher says that he doesn't want everything in the list. He's just making the list so he can better decide on what he wants. After dropping off young Christopher at the daycare, Chris starts expositioning about his life. He tells us that he was 28 years old when he first met his father, and this made him want to be a better father to his own children. He says that he wants his own children to know who their father is. As he continues to narrate his life, he tells us about the various things that go on in his life. But, more importantly, he talks about the machine he's been hauling around with him everywhere. The most important detail of which, contrary to the other man's ramblings, is that the machine is not a time machine. Instead, it's a state-of-the-art machine that can scan the bone density of people. Which is also how he makes his livelihood. But, as we know, state-of-the-art machines aren't cheap, which is why Chris has a hard time selling it to others. We also find out that it doesn't offer much in the way of innovation, as it only manages to offer a slightly denser picture than an X-ray machine, for twice the price. On the way, he meets Linda, his wife, and tells her that she's going to have to pick up Christopher. After a bit of an argument, he starts to head off to Oakland, only to find out that his car has been booted and taken away because he parked illegally. This is where he tells us that he hasn't been able to sell many of his scanners, and that they're in a bad place right now. Back at home, Linda and Chris start arguing because of their inability to pay taxes. After a brief argument, Linda storms off. As Chris tries to solve the Rubik's Cube his son got as a gift, we find out from a speech from Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, that the whole country is going through an economic crisis. Back at it again on another morning. Chris talks to a man that drove in on a Ferrari, and asks him what he does to have that much luxury in his life. After a brief talk, he looks at all the people coming out of the brokerage firm. He wonders why he can't be as happy as all of the others coming out of the building. At home, Chris has another argument with Linda after telling her about his plan to be a stockbroker. Fast forward to the next day, Chris drops off his machine to a street performer for safekeeping while he goes in for his interview, but, during the interview, he sees her running away with his machine from inside the building and proceeds to give chase. But, she manages to lose him in the subway. Without his machine with him and a job application letter for which he is way underqualified for, Chris returns home feeling lost. Back at it on a new morning, Chris tells his son about a nickname, 10-gallon head, which he used to have back in the day. Christopher tells him that he knows about the 10-gallon hat from a movie he saw at the daycare, which makes Chris angry because Chris wants Christopher to learn at his daycare, not to watch movies. But discussing this with his caretaker Ms. Chu doesn't get him anywhere, so he just goes on to apply for the brokerage job he wanted. After dropping off his application letter with Jay Thistle, the manager of the firm, Chris spots the hippie that stole his machine on the way out. Not wanting to lose his machine, Chris starts to chase after them. At this point, he starts giving a brief history of how he came by these machines to sell. Apparently, he spent all his life savings on these machines and signed a contract to sell them, but he was not aware of the fact that hospitals weren't really interested in buying these machines. Which would explain the poverty they live in. But, silver lining, he manages to get back the machine that was stolen from him. Seeing Chris bring back not one, but two of these machines back home, Linda gets very upset. After yet another argument, this one a bit more intense, Chris finds himself feeling more down than ever. He desperately needs a new source of income. The next day, Chris tries his luck again with the hiring person, Mr. Thistle. He manages to share a ride with him, and on the way, the two get into an argument over whether or not Chris can solve a Rubik's Cube. Desperate to prove himself, Chris attempts to solve the cube. And he successfully manages to do it. After Thistle leaves, Chris notices that he doesn't have the money to pay for the cab, so he decides to make a run for it. Though he manages to lose him in the train, he also loses his machine because it got caught between the doors of the train. If this wasn't already bad enough, Linda tells him that she's leaving him, and that she's done with Chris. She even takes Christopher with her. Distraught to hear this news, he rushes home only to find it completely empty. When all seems lost, he gets a call from Jay Thistle, the brokerage guy he was with earlier in the movie. Thistle tells him to come by the firm the day after tomorrow so they can sit down and talk about the job. He tells him to note down the number of his secretary, but, since Chris couldn't find a pen or pencil to write the number down, he tries to memorize it. On the way, he meets his friend Wayne, who starts talking about numbers with Chris. But, Chris successfully manages to note down the number of his secretary. The next morning, he goes to Christopher's daycare and meets Linda there too. The two argue and Chris tells her that she can leave, but Christopher is going to stay with him. He picks up his son from the daycare and takes him home. Back at home, he gets a notice from his landlord that he has 1 week left before he'll kick him out. He also tells him that he has to paint the house before he leaves. As if things weren't already bad enough, he gets arrested because of all the parking tickets he has racked up. The police officer tells him that he's going to have to stay till morning tomorrow, so Chris calls Linda to take care of Christopher till then. The next morning, the cops let Chris go and he runs for his job interview. At the firm, he meets all of the hiring managers. Instead of giving them some fake story, he tells them the truth about everything. He explains that he was arrested for failing to pay his parking tickets on time, and that he was painting his home before he got arrested. Which explains why he's dressed the way he is. He also tells them that despite him being underqualified, he is the type of person that, even if he doesn't know the answer to a question, he will work hard till he can find the answer to it. Chris miraculously convinces them to take him on. But, all isn't well yet. Because his internship program had no salary. So he had to make do with selling the scanners while also working on his newfound internship at the brokerage. The next morning, Linda comes by to drop off a sleeping Christopher. Linda tells Christopher that she's going to move to New York. She found a new job at a restaurant his sister's boyfriend just opened up. The two discuss Christopher, with Chris still being adamant about keeping his son with him. Linda protests a bit, but eventually agrees and leaves. After his wife leaves, Chris calls Thistle and tells him that he's going to accept the invitation for the internship. The next morning, Chris packs up all of the things in his house and goes to live in a hotel nearby. The next morning, he plays basketball with his son. Young Christopher says that he wants to go pro at basketball, but, being a practical man, Chris tells him that he won't be able to go pro. But, Chris also tells his son that he shouldn't let anyone tell him what he can or can't do. Not even his own father. After a little motivational talk, they two go and try to sell the bone density scanners again. Chris manages to sell one of the scanners. The next day, Chris takes off to his internship. At the internship, Chris manages to make an impression on one of the board members, Mr. Frome. He spots his stolen bone density machine and chases after it again. But this time, his chase doesn't go as well and he gets hit by a car. But, the only thing he loses is his shoe. But he doesn't let this stop him. The next day, he's back on the internship working hard. He even ends up doing favors for his teacher. A little bit of busy work like bringing him coffee, bringing him a donut and whatnot. Working 2 jobs, and having to take care of his son too. Poor Chris was working so much that he ended up half asleep on the way home. But, even after so much work in 2 months, he barely manages to work up a sheet of potential clients. At random, Chris decides to call a name at the top of a list, Walter Ribbon from the Pacific Bell Company. Mr. Ribbon tells Chris that someone just canceled a meeting, and that he can meet him right now if he comes. Not wanting to miss out on a client like this, he starts to make his way to Mr. Ribbon's office. But on the way, his internship instructor tells him to park his car in another place instead of the one it's in. Seeing no place to park, he decides to take his instructor's car to Mr. Ribbon's office. But despite parking the car nearby and running to the office, Chris missed Mr. Ribbon. The next day, Chris, along with Christopher, goes to Mr. Ribbon's home. As it turns out, luck's on Chris's side. As he manages to hitch a ride along with Mr. Ribbon to the game. At the game, Chris manages to interact with Mr. Ribbon as well as his friends from the Pacific Bell Pension Company. But despite what turns out to be a fun day, it takes a sour turn as Mr. Ribbon tells Chris that he can't let Chris handle his company's fund due to him being new. 4 months pass, and Chris manages to sell off the scanners and things seem to be going well, good enough until Chris gets a letter. Apparently, all of his money had been taken because he hadn't paid his taxes. With just $21 in his bank account, Chris was officially broke. Chris tries asking Wayne for money, the money he owes, but Wayne just runs away. Depressed and feeling lost at the park with his son, Chris spots his bone density machine, the one he lost in the subway when he was running from the cab driver, in the hands of the hobo that had taken it. Chris tells his son to stay put, and goes to take the machine back. After getting back the bone density scanner, he tries to sell it off to some hospital the same day because he desperately needed the money. Despite some dead ends, he manages to get a potential client, but, for some reason, the scanner doesn't work. Having no other options, he goes back home to find all of his things removed from the hotel room. Now at the absolutely lowest point in his life, and with no other options, Chris goes to his Wayne to stay the night. But even that turns out to be a dead end. Stuck in a subway with nowhere to go, Christopher asks his son what they're going to do now. To which Chris doesn't respond. Why the two are sitting at the bench, Christopher asks his dad if the bone density scanner is really a time machine, like the hobo was saying. Chris tells him that it actually is a time machine, and that he should press the button if he wants to go back in time. The two of them play around and pretend they're in the past. With nowhere to stay, Chris has to lock himself in the public bathroom of the subway. The next day, he tries to get a room at a shelter, but, because it's a woman's shelter, they fail to get a room there. But, they do get a lead on a shelter that will take them, but, as is the theme in this movie, nothing goes as well. When there are just 4 spots left in the shelter, Chris gets cut off by another person, and a small fight starts between the two. But, Chris successfully manages to get his spot in the shelter because of a good old man telling the shelter manager that the guy sliced in front of the line. Finally, with a bed to stay in, Chris bathes his son while talking about things to take his mind off of things. After playing with his son a bit, Chris puts him to sleep and starts to work on the scanner. The next morning, Chris heads back to work and starts putting in even more effort at his job. Back when he had to finish his work 2 hours earlier than the rest, now he has to finish it 3 hours earlier if he wishes to stay in the shelter. On the way to the shelter, the two nearly miss the bus and make a run for it. But, Christopher loses his beloved Captain America figurine as the two run towards the bus. Luckily, they make it to the shelter on time. At the shelter, Christopher asks Chris if he's prepared for his test tomorrow. Back in the office, Chris finishes his test. On the way back, Chris meets Mr. Fr again, who takes the last $5 from Chris, which were also the last $5 he had. To make matters worse, the two even miss the line at the shelter, and end up having to stay somewhere else because of it. To make ends meet, Chris donates blood for $24. The two then head off to the shelter, and this time they make it. As Chris is tucking Christopher to bed, Christopher asks if Linda left because of him, to which Chris tells him that she left because of herself, not because of him. Christopher calls him a good dad and goes to sleep. After putting his son to sleep, Chris manages to fix his scanner, and sell his scanner. With $250 more, he takes his son back to a hotel. The next day, Chris takes his son to the beach. The two of them enjoy the quiet retreat from all of the noise and the hustle and bustle of city life. Fast forward some more, we find out that Chris managed to sign 31 accounts from all of the Pacific Bell employees he met at the ball game he went with Mr. Ribbon. On his last day, his instructor calls him. Feeling nervous about his results, he goes to meet the board of directors again. Luckily for him, he succeeds in his pursuit of happiness and manages to land the job as a broker. As he goes back home to his son, he narrates the final part of his life. The little part is called happiness. As the credits roll, we find out that Chris even managed to start his own brokerage firm, known as Gardner Rich, in 1987. In the epilogue of the movie, we see Chris and Christopher playfully talking and making jokes. And we can see that Chris has finally made it. And that's a wrap up for today. Comment down your views for the movie using #FilmoRecaps. Stay healthy and stay safe.